When we first moved to Germany, we knew that there would be lots of obstacles that we would need to overcome. One that we anticipated was a language barrier, which we are both now working on. But we did not anticipate there being a number barrier.
Say what?
Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. I am Donnie and this is my wife Aubrey. We are two Americans living in Germany, sharing all of our experiences and our travels here on our channel. And there are a few differences that we have noticed pertaining to numbers here in Germany that are simply different than the way that we do things in the US. Neither way are right or wrong, and honestly, a lot of these are little trivial differences, but are still really interesting to learn about. And so today we are going to present to you 8 differences in the way that Germans write, say, or show numbers than how we do it in the US.
Some of these differences aren't specific to Germany or the US and are used in other parts of the world too, but we've just now noticed them since living here in Germany. So the first one is the difference in how the US and Germany write their dates. For example, in the US, today's date would be 4/11/2020, but in Germany, it is 11/4/2020. So this is something that we've just had to get used to living over here. Whenever someone asks us the date or asks us our birthday, we've just had to switch the numbers in our head. Or reading a sign that says the date of an event, we have to switch it in our head to know what the date is going to be. We've noticed that we've been getting used to the German way because whenever we've received wedding invitations from friends back in the US, we've had to remember to not switch the date whenever we read it and remember that this is actually month, day, year instead of day, month, year. Now, obviously, this isn't as difficult whenever there's higher numbers like the 31st, because there's not a 31st month, just day, but it's those smaller numbers that we have to really think about for a second.
And speaking of switching numbers in our head, another interesting difference that we've learned as we've been overcoming the language barrier that we've already talked about, that is how the Germans say numbers versus how we say numbers in the US. So for example, in the US, for the number 21, we say the 20 and then the 1 in the order that the number is written. But in German, the number is 21, which is 1 and 20. So they start with the second number that you write and then go back to the first one. I'm sure for German speakers that is very simple since they've grown up with that their whole life. That's a whole new counting system that I'm having to get used to. But then what gets interesting is once you get into the higher numbers, like the hundreds. So for us, 321, 3, 2, 1. But in German, you say 321. So first number is 3, which is the number I'm used to in the US, but then all the way to the end of the number with the 1, and then back to the 2 for the 20. This has been very interesting and complicated when I've been learning to count, but I'm quickly getting there. It is really interesting to see that difference.
When we first arrived in Germany, we were staying at an Airbnb while we were looking for apartments. So I knew that the Airbnb that we were renting was the one on the first floor. When we arrived, we went to the ground level when we were able to get into the room, but quickly realized that this was the wrong apartment because the furniture looked completely different than the pictures. That's when we learned that in Germany, they number their floors differently than they do in the US. In the US, we number our floors as the ground floor is 1, the next floor up is 2, and then up from there is 3, 4, 5, etc. But in Germany, the ground level is ground or 0, and then the next floor up is 1 OG, and then the next floor up is 2 OG. So what we would think of as the first floor, Germans would think of as 0 or G, and what we would think of as the second floor, they would say is the first floor. However, the labeling of basements is the same in Germany and the US, usually being B1, B2, B3, etc., or -1, -2, -3, etc.
One of the biggest and most challenging differences that we faced whenever we first arrived here was whenever people would write numbers down for us, like a phone number or a room number, and we had to figure out what the numbers they were writing were. Everybody writes numbers differently, but for the most part, Germans and Americans don't write all of our numbers the same way. For the first example is the number 7. A lot of Germans will write their number 7 this way, but a lot of Americans will write it this way. I personally write my number 7 the same way that Germans do for the most part, and so that one didn't stick out to me very much when we first got here, but there were 2 other numbers that really stuck out to me a lot more and I had a harder time reading. And the first one was the number 9, because a lot of Germans will write their number 9 this way, and a lot of Americans will write their number 9 this way. The German number 9 looked a lot like a little G to me, and especially whenever people would write passwords for Wi-Fi down, I couldn't figure out if I was supposed to put in a number 9 or a lowercase g. However, the biggest and most challenging one to figure out is the number 1. Most Germans will write the number 1 this way. However, a lot of Americans will write the number 1 this way. The German number 1 was so confusing because different variations have the tail different lengths than other ones in Germany. So sometimes it will look like a capital A, sometimes it will look like a number 7 to us, sometimes it will look like a 1. However, I also can see the confusion with the American number 1 because a lot of times it can be confused with the I or an L, or different Americans write the number 1 in more complex ways. But this is so interesting to me because I thought the numbers would be the same between both countries. We use the same numbering system, so why would we write them differently? Yet these very minute differences exist that make it a little bit challenging to figure out what people are actually writing down. And for this one, I want to know from you guys, how do you write your number 1? There's going to be a poll that pops up right here. You can click on that and you can choose, do you write yours like the German way of the capital A looking number 1? Or do you write yours like the American lowercase L looking number 1? Or do you do it completely different? Leave those in the comments below so we can see how everybody does it.
Once we moved to Germany and we had a new address, we had to start putting our address on letters and different forms. And then we realized that they write addresses differently here in Germany than in the US. So in the US, when you write your address, you have the name of the person, and then on the next line you have the house number and then the street name, and then the next line has the city name and then the zip code. But in Germany, you flip-flop those. So you first have the person you're addressing the letter to, and then you have the street name and then the house number, and then the next line is going to be your zip code and then the city name.
Just like how the US and Germany switches the way they write the numbers and addresses on an envelope, they also switch when they use commas and periods in numbers. So in the US, for an example, when we write the number 1000, we would have 1 comma followed by the zeros, but in Germany, they would have 1 period followed by the zeros. And then when it comes down to the decimal numbers, we would write the number 25 cents as 0 period 25, but in Germany, they would write it 0 comma 25. Just like everything else, this has gotten a little bit of getting used to, especially when we're looking at prices for items, because we see the 1 and then the period, and it just looks like only €1 or $1 to us until we realize there's a whole bunch of zeros lined up after that, or that price obviously doesn't make sense with whatever we're looking at. But more so when we're looking at the prices for smaller items that like we would see as 25 cents, and we see the comma there, it just looks really out of place to us when we're so used to seeing a period for the decimal numbers.
When we first moved to Germany, one of the things that we had to do was to get new German phone numbers. But we noticed that our new numbers looked a little bit different than what we were used to in the US. So in the US, the country code is +1, and then you have your 3-digit area code, and then you'll have a 7-digit number that's grouped by 3 numbers and then followed by 4 numbers. So usually the area code is written with parentheses around it, and then the next 3 numbers will be followed by a dash between the final numbers. Of course, whenever you are calling in the US, you don't have to include the country code. You just type out those 10 digits into the phone. German phone numbers have a similar progression, with the country code being +49, then your area code, and then the rest of your phone number. However, we have had some confusions with the German phone numbers. For example, my phone number has 11 digits in it, and Donnie's number has 10 digits in it. We've also seen some area codes that have 2 digits and some that have 3. And sometimes we've seen people put a 0 in front of their area code, but sometimes they haven't. And sometimes we've seen the numbers grouped by spaces, and sometimes we've seen slashes in between. So if you could help us to learn a little bit more about how Germans write their phone numbers and what that 0 at the front means and when you include that, that would really help us out because we're still learning about German phone numbers.
And our biggest difference between Germans and Americans when it comes to numbers is something that you can tell where someone is from just by looking at them because of this difference. But before I tell you our biggest difference, if you've liked this video, please hit that like button. Also make sure you hit the subscribe button and also that bell icon so you'll be notified every time we upload a new video. But for our final difference, it is the way that Germans and Americans count on their hands. So normally when an American counts, they will start with their index finger and then work their way across to their little finger, and then their final finger for the number 5 would be their thumb. Versus a German, whenever they count, they will start with their thumb and then work all the way across to their little finger. This really makes you stick out whenever you are at some place, especially like a bratwurst stand at a Christmas market, and you walk up and you're trying to practice your new German and you say zwei Bratwurst and you hold up this hand. They will know he is not actually a German, besides the fact that your German probably isn't any good. But Germans will walk up and they will do their thumb and their index finger to show that they want 2.
3 Gläser.
Weil Sie sich eben verraten haben. Hauptstummführer. Sie sind so deutsch wie dieser Scotch.
So this is something that we've been working on along with learning German as we try to blend in more and more into the culture here is by actually counting like a true German versus like an American. Now this is just normally how people do it in the US and in Germany. There are different variations of it. Like for example, the number 3, an American can do it like the way whenever they start with their index finger and go to their middle finger and then their ring finger, or there's a variation when it's their middle finger, their ring finger, and their pinky finger. However, one of the limitations that I have with trying to do the number 4 in the German way of counting, but I can't figure out how to get my pinky to go down and all the other fingers to stay up, but this is the way that you will predominantly see it in both of these countries. And for this one as well, we want to know from you, how do you do this one? So again, a poll is going to pop up in the top right corner. Click on that one and tell us, do you count with your hand starting with your thumb or with your index finger? But if you do it some other way that does not involve either of those beginnings, write that in the comments. How do you count with your hands?
I'm not sure what to do with my hands.
And like we always try to stress, there's not a right or a wrong with these differences. You're just gonna do what you grew up with. That's what's gonna feel most natural when you're using numbers. We just think it's really interesting that even with numbers, there are differences between Germans and Americans.
So thanks so much again for watching this video, guys. We really hope that you enjoyed it, and we will hopefully see you in our next videos because we have so much more exciting things that we are going to show you.
Cheers.
And sharing out...
Owls. No owls here.
That's not what I said. Why are you wiping everything so much? So today we want to present with you, dang it, present to you. I know. Into action. Into.
So some of these different, are you ready?
I don't know.
Okay. So some of these differences, so the first one is how they write.
How they write?
Remember that this is in the US, and so it goes day, month, year. No, it goes month, day, year.
Yeah.
So if you're calling a number from outside of the US, you put the +1, of course. No, yeah.
That have been different than ours back home. All of these have been very trivial and very action. You're gonna love me. Okay, here we go.